Selamat datang di Politeknik LAN Jakarta.
Kampus kami menerapkan protokol kesehatan bagi setiap mahasiswa, dosen, dan tamu yang berkunjung.
Agar selalu aman dan nyaman untuk beraktivitas dan kuliah.
Belajar di Politeknik LAN Jakarta menjadi pilihan terbaik untuk membangun karir di masa depan. Kampus dengan 10 keunggulan, menyelenggarakan pendidikan yang siap kerja, perguruan tinggi milik pemerintah, kesempatan mendapatkan beasiswa, biaya terjangkau, terbuka kesempatan menjadi aparatur sipil negara, tenaga pengajar yang kompeten, perkuliahan yang berbasis IT, serta magang di instansi pemerintah, BUMN dan BUMD, serta di pihak swasta. Green Campus di pusat Jakarta, dan jaringan alumni yang ada di kementerian, lembaga, swasta, dan pemerintah.
Kuliahnya bisa hybrid loh, bisa daring dan luring. Yuk kita intip kuliah malamnya.
Kalau mau pintar, harus sering ke perpustakaan. Yuk!
Teman-teman, ada yang sedang latihan wall climbing juga nih. Yuk lihat.
Program pendidikan di Politeknik LAN Jakarta memberikan pengalaman yang sangat berharga bagi saya selaku aparatur sipil negara di lingkungan pemerintah Provinsi DKI Jakarta dalam penguatan karakter, memberikan semangat perubahan menuju Indonesia yang lebih maju.
Your only limit is your mind. Hal ini membawa spirit perubahan dalam hidup saya. Saya menjadi lebih persisten, gigih, dan berkomitmen.
Semangat untuk terus mengembangkan diri dengan terus belajar, mengasah kemampuan, dan pengalaman adalah kunci yang menjadi insan profesional yang kompeten, tangguh, dan unggul.
Melanjutkan kuliah setelah bekerja sebagai profesional menjadi pilihan terbaik saya untuk mengembangkan diri. Penting bagi saya untuk mengakselerasi kemampuan untuk lebih maju.
Satu hal yang mendorong saya melanjutkan kuliah pada program studi doktoral Administrasi Pembangunan Negara di Politeknik LAN Jakarta adalah untuk mendukung karir saya sebagai pejabat fungsional analis kebijakan ahli media.
Sistem pengajaran dan perkuliahan di Politeknik LAN disusun dengan mengedepankan konsep kepemimpinan untuk membentuk karakter pemimpin-pemimpin di bidang pemerintahan yang unggul di masa depan.
Nah, seru-seru kan aktivitasnya?
Ditunggu di Politeknik LAN Jakarta.
Sudah siap berubah?
Ayo berubah.
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 Berubah. Lebih baik.
Lebih unggul. Lebih unggul.
Tes. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start the public lecture, there are several rules for all participants. First, all participants can stream this public lecture through Zoom meeting or YouTube account of Politeknik LAN Jakarta. Second, all participants on the Zoom meeting, please mute your speaker during the event. Third, participants can ask questions directly by raising your hand in this room or in Zoom meeting. Or you can type the question and ask to the panel speakers to chat on Zoom or YouTube by mentioning your name, affiliation, then your question. And please keep it short and precise. Fourth, the question can be asked in English or Bahasa Indonesia. Fifth, a link of attendance form will be available for all participants by the end of the session. Sixth, for safety measures, sit in a comfortable chair, ensure the safety of your electronic device and your internet connection. And in case of emergency, please exit the entrance door and gather in the meeting point in a consecutive manner. Ladies and gentlemen, the public lecture will start very soon. Please be seated and mute your speaker.
Director of NIPA School of Administration Jakarta, the Honorable Professor Dr. Nurliah Nurdin M.A. Key speaker for today, Eric Allen Jones, Ph.D. from Northern Illinois University. Beloved students and all participants, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are delighted to welcome you to the third series of public lecture today, August 23rd, 2022. NIPA School of Administration Jakarta has the honor to present this annual public lecture with the main topic, Administrating Indonesia, Continuity and Change from Colonial to Post-Colonial. The public lectures aim to establish international scholars and academic community in contributing to achievement of scientific studies and forum in the field of governance, public administrations, development of our country with historical perspective. This public lecture will be held until 9 p.m. of Indonesian times with complete agenda as follows. Singing the national anthem of Indonesia, Indonesia Raya. A group prayer. The opening speech by the director of NIPA School of Administration Jakarta. Group photo. The keynote speech led by our moderator. Q&A sessions and closings.
For a moment, we would like to invite you to rise and sing Indonesian anthem Indonesia Raya. Kepada seluruh hadirin dimohon berdiri.
Jangan
Silahkan duduk kembali.
Ladies and gentlemen, the second agenda of this public lecture is a prayer, which will be led by Mr. Saifur Rahman. The floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Wa'fu anna ya karim ya dzal jalali wal ikram. Allahumma shalli ala sayyidina Muhammadin fil awwalin wal akhirin. Wa sallim wa radhiyallahu tabaraka wa ta'ala an kulli sahabati rasulil asma'in. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Hamdan hamidin. Hamdan yuwafi ni'amahu wa yukafi mazidah. Ya Rabbana lakal hamdu wa lakal syukru. Kama yanbaghi li jalali wajhikal karim wa 'azimi sultanik. Allahumma ja'al jam'ana hadza jam'an marhuman wa tafarraquna min ba'di tafarraquma ma'suman wa la taj'al fina wala minna syaqiyan wala mahruman. Allahumma alaf baina qulubina wa aslih dzata bainina wa hdina subulas salam. Allahumma wa hassil maqasidana wa baligh muradana bil khair. Allahumma wa hassil maqasidana wa baligh muradana bil khair. Rabbana taqabbal minna innaka antas samiul alim wa tub alaina innaka antat tawwabur rahim. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina adzabannar. Bi fadlika subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun alal mursalin. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to listen to the opening speech by the director of NIPA School of Administration Jakarta, Professor Dr. Nurliah Nurdin M.A. Please welcome Professor Dr. Nurliah Nurdin M.A.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Before I start, may I request everyone to get a seat in front, please. Yuk, pindah yuk.
Maju ke depan.
Silakan Bapak Ibu untuk menyesuaikan tempat duduknya. Maju ke depan. Di baris kedua bisa maju ke depan.
Ayo langsung.
Untuk mengisi tempat yang kosong. Silakan.
So, Mr. Eric, that we are full of people around 100,000. Mr. Eric, how are you there? Good. Oke, silakan pindah ya supaya kita bisa mulai dengan nyaman. Silakan ya nih. Nggak lama-lama nih, ayo. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. My respect for the invited keynote speaker tonight, which is early morning. So Mr. Eric became early bird this morning. Thank you for having your time with us. Mr. Eric Jones, Ph.D. He's an associate professor, Department of History, Executive Director for Global Initiative College of Liberal Arts and Science, Northern Illinois Universities. The school that I was there around 20 years ago, and it was last June when I visited NIU and Mr. Eric also here. So I visited NIU and Mr. Eric here. That's where he met Ibu Mala and team and requested for today that he has to share his thought with us in the public lectures. So again, let's give applause to Mr. Eric. And a high official of National Institute of Public Administration, either in person come here around us, also online scholars who with us right now. Praise be to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, the most merciful, for his blessing, joy, and willing. We can succeed this public lecture series on administration Indonesia, continuity and change from colonial to post-colonial. Merdeka, merdeka, merdeka. Yes. Semangat Hari Kemerdekaan 77 Indonesia tercinta. So Eric, actually we like to have you at our celebration, August 17th. In this month, yeah, we still feel the spirit of this struggle of Indonesia. We just heard in a president's speech a few days ago in the Independence Day, he's mentioned that our nation outperforms many others, even developed ones, in terms of economic and health front. Despite the fact that global unrest may easily wipe off everything Indonesia currently, we would face the year 2023 with more reason to be optimistic. However, still we have to remember that the world nations are now still intertwined, that we are powerless to stand alone. Yeah. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we witnessed the Indonesian long journey to political independence. Colonialism is the robust and extractive in the most ways. Stories of ill-fated colonies across the countries were many. There we can set a variety of negative impact as a wide range discrimination of colonialism. Then the commencement of the Second World War and the ensuing Japanese military offensives in 1942 finally changed the dynamic of colonial era forever. The 1945 proclamation was a call to end the centuries of colonial administration. This was narrative of heroism and transformation against corrective governance, indignity towards nation ideology, and violation of human rights. Are we having free right now? That will be the good questions. Mr. Eric and my colleagues, my students, were among 400 participants in YouTube. Around, I think, 250 appear in person right now. And then we also have online participants. Indonesia and the US has been long connected in administration, governance, and development since. In 1969, under the Nixon administration, Washington provided various assistance programs to help the pro-Western government of President Suharto. This was also very common that amid the global crisis hit the late regime of Orde Baru. The Washington's intervention was favored. This post-colonial era has changed the Indonesia's perspective to a more global-minded. As Barack Obama said, Indonesia is not only a regional power that is rising, it is also a global force. Ladies and gentlemen, rapidly growing levels of disruption, post-pandemic issues are challenging. I believe that by participating in this public lecture, we can determine collaborative ways to accelerate the exchange of ideas and scaling up good practices in pursuing the continuity and changes of administration in post-colonial era. Once again, I deliver my endless gratitude to our speakers, Eric Jones and Sururi Awil, the committees, for all the hard work. And this is also a start of our memorandum of understanding. We having a collaboration, educational collaboration between Politeknik ST Jakarta and Northern Illinois University. Thank you. Enjoy the public speaking today by Eric Jones. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
And also, I think I have to remind everyone that Mr. Eric Jones only be available with us until 8:30, which is 8:30 in the morning because he has to visit embassy. So make it short by 8 and we have 30 minutes for question and answer. Thank you.
Baik Prof, mohon izin tetap di tempat sebentar, akan diambil foto sebentar.
Ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to have a photo session. Akan saya pandu. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you for your cooperation.
Done? Baik, sudah. The next agenda is public lecture sessions, which is led by a moderator, Mrs. Keisha Dinya Solihati St. M.A.B. Please welcome Mrs. Keisha to lead this session.
Okay, chat. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you Mbak Vida and Mbak Handini as the Master of Ceremony. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Nurliah, fellow lecturers, my dear students, and to all guests. It is with great honor, my name is Keisha Dinya Solihati as the moderator for this session. Firstly, we are very thankful for your interest for this blended event. This is the first event that we had after 2 years of since COVID-19 pandemic, yeah. So thank you for your interest. In total, we are now having around 412 participants in the Zoom meeting. Besides that, we also have around 200 participants gathering live in this room. And also we have around 100 participants being viewed live in YouTube. So in total, we are now reached until around 800 participants joining in this evening. Okay. This third series of 4 public lectures theme is on Administrating Indonesia, Continuity and Change from Colonial to Post-Colonial. The sessions will consist of 2 parts. The first one is presentation from our key speaker, Mr. Eric Jones, Ph.D. Hello, sir. And later we will have discussion and Q&A until 7:30 p.m. Indonesian time. Sorry, 8:30 Indonesian time. For students, don't forget to make a resume on this lecture and upload it in the attendance link that will be shared at the end of our session. Okay, following what Professor Nurliah has said, we have celebrated our 77th Indonesian anniversary, where previously we have been colonized by Netherlands and Japan for hundreds of years. But even after 77 years of independency, maybe we can say that Indonesia is still at an average growth. For example, if we compare to South Korea, who has their independence was 15 Augustus 1948, 3 years after Indonesia. But we can see now that South Korea is rapidly growing and even becoming the fastest growing developed countries in the world. As Indonesia, we are still classified as developing country. Now, and maybe the question is why Indonesia, like other Asian country that has been colonialized before, is still unstable. Therefore, in this lecture, we invite our key speaker who has a deep thought and did many exquisite research of the development of the country and linking it back to history and what makes it that way. We are very honored to have Mr. Eric Jones, Ph.D. from Northern Illinois University. Good evening, Mr. Eric. Okay. Okay. Hello, how are you, sir?
Good. Selamat malam.
Selamat malam, apa kabar? Yeah, don't be fooled by his look ya, because actually Dr. Eric can understand and can speak bahasa Indonesia. Ya, betul Pak, Pak Eric.
It's my secret though, so.
Yeah. So to all participants, don't be afraid to ask questions, because he can understand. Or not, I will try to communicate. Okay, now Dr. Eric Jones, before I let you have your time to present, let me read a quick summary on your CV. I will only read a short version because our time will run out just by reading your impressive CV, sir. Mr. Eric Jones is an associate professor in Department of History of Northern Illinois University, USA, and he also holds a role as the assistant director for Center of Southeast Asian Studies. His education history, he got his BA with summa cum laude predicate from Brigham Young University, Hawaii, majoring in history. Then he got his Master of Arts also, and also his PhD from University of California, Berkeley, also majoring in history. Extraordinarily, he can speak 8 languages. That was his English, of course, and then fluently in Dutch, Indonesian, and Malay, intermediate level, Afrikaans intermediate, German, and he also studies French and Frisian. Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, and he has many exquisite research, publication, and grants, among which he wrote books titled Wives, Slaves, and Concubines, a history of the female underclass in Dutch Asia, an article journal on G.C. Van Loor and the problematic origins of autonomous Indonesian history. He also created podcasts regarding South Asian crossroads and history. And also he got many grants and fellowship from many reputable institutions, such as V1 NRC FLIS, GETSI Consortium, from Henry Luke Foundation, from SEAYLP, from Asian Conference Grant, from PYLP, and J. William Fulbright Scholar from Malaysia and Netherlands. Okay, that was a very remarkable CV. Now, without very further ado, we will turn the time over to Dr. Eric Jones to present his materials. And to all participants, if you have questions, you can ask the question directly by raising your hands in this room or in the Zoom, or you can use the future Q&A and type your question there. Question in Bahasa Indonesia or English is fine. And we also have prepared 10 giveaways for selected best questions. Okay. All right, Dr. Eric, thank you. You have your time to deliver the materials. Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum. Can you hear me well?
Yes, sir.
Yes, all good. Okay, good. Well, I can't thank you enough for that kind introduction, and of course your colleague Dr. Nurliah, who is part of the NIU Mafia in Indonesia, and we're so proud of our alum. They are really one of the reasons that I came to NIU was to work with the group working on Southeast Asia, and especially the great scholars of Indonesia who've passed through this institution, and we still are proud of today. And so we want to continue. I should say before I forget that like Dr. Nurliah, you should consider coming to Northern Illinois University, get your degree. We would love to have you. We have a Kampung Indonesia here. We've got all of the things a good Indonesian student might want to have, and we would love to. We can talk more later down the road if you have questions about that. But yet today I'm here to share some of my views on the history of Indonesia, and then thoughts about the continuity to the present of some of those trends in history, and then the changes that have evolved and the directions that Indonesia is headed. And perhaps we can get into that in the Q&A as well. But I have a few slides. Maybe I'll share my screen here, and we can talk about. I'm going to focus on what I'm calling the Asia trade, which is the sort of Zaman Penjajahan in Indonesia as a context for thinking about those processes and structures that were set in motion, and then how those evolved over time. So let me share that here. Yeah, okay. And so as you of course know, I like to say Indonesia is the reason that Christopher Columbus got in a boat. Indonesia is really one of the reasons why the world looks the way that it does today. If we think of its connection, globalization, the coming together of world trade and commerce, really Indonesia has always been at the heart of that exchange that we now call globalization. And it really was the indigenous spices, buah pala, bunga pala, cengkeh, lada, hitam, et cetera, are all materials that drew in merchants and traders from around the world, as well as I'll flip through here, everything from hornbill to swallow's nests, in bringing traders and merchants to the region. And I have because of the way that it attracted merchants from China, from India, from the Arab world, and then later from the West. I think that one of the reasons why Indonesia is poised to be so successful on the world stage in a post-colonial way is because its default is seeing value added in exchange and interaction with people who are different, with people who are outsiders who come to Indonesia. So part of the warm welcome we feel as foreigners coming to Indonesia is built into Indonesian DNA as a country, because it has been doing this for more than 1,000 years. That is seeing value added in exchange, and rather than looking at say an outsider as suspicious, instead it sees that as an opportunity for interaction and exchange. And so I think that is, again, we'll get into more about how I think that evolves, but I think that's a key for and a real indicator for success. And I guess I would say I wouldn't worry too much about Korea. Indonesia is a much more complicated country, 900 languages, 30,000 islands. Korea is more like Singapore than it is like, it's a pretty homogeneous small place in comparison. And so I think Indonesia's success is pretty written in the stars, I think. So let me say, so this exchange of fine spices, bunga pala, pepper, nutmeg, clove, mace, it brings these traders in, as well as the geography. I have sort of Malacca and the Maritime Asia as a slide here. These part of Indonesia's wealth is in that area that looks a bit white there and raised. That is the Sunda Shelf, and those mean that is an abundant fishery. That means that those waters are some of the most rich and abundant in the world, and also so not only do what's sort of above the water in the fine spices attract people, but the fine fisheries feed them as well, and are a source of attractant and a draw for them. So also, I point out that the straits here, the Straits of Malacca between Malaysia and Indonesia, are continue to be one of the most important strategic waterways in the world, and meaning that really the world trade and commerce has to pass through Indonesia. It's just a requirement for geographically, for the way that Indonesia is situated. Jumping ahead a little, historically, when while Europe was still developing. You know, part of what's interesting in colonial history and I have my Indonesian friends will often say, you know, and it's not untrue, you know, 350 years of colonization colonization by the Dutch. But really, if you look at places like Bali, for example, it's not until the 20th century, 1910s, that places across Indonesia are actually conquered. So it happens over time, slowly, and not all at once. And sometimes the emphasis on the colonial history can overshadow what was a Southeast Asia before colonization that was much more urbanized, had bigger cities than Europe in it. And, you know, I've got a fear, of course, in Indonesia. And so while the colonial moment is the most recent in the past, most recent past in Indonesia's history, for most of history, Asia has been at the top of the mountain, and the European colonial moment has been brief and recent. And as we see power and influence moving back to Asia in a major way, East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, that is actually a returning to a trend where the world has operated for most of its history. That is, most of the world's population, geography, resources, innovation have been in Asia for most of history. And so while we can't forget the you know, we just celebrated Indonesia's independence, we also need to not let that overshadow the fact that in the long span of history that historians like to look at, Indonesia has been free from outside influence and is once again and now can sort of move forward unimpeded. So that's, I think, an important point to make, that we can recognize the colonial past, but in the long sweep of Indonesian history, it was a brief one, and can't define Indonesia alone. You know, this is a picture of Indonesia and sitting at this vast network of the what I've titled the Asia trade. You know, everything from coffee, mocha, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, textiles, saltpeter, gold, human trafficking, of course, from in Asia, to East Asia, copper, tea, textiles, porcelain. These are all part of this age of commerce that Indonesia was the most important player in, and this engine of exchange. And because of the monsoon, sort of the musim in how the rains work and the winds work in world history, it meant that merchants could travel easily from down through the Pacific, in through Indonesia, into the Indian Ocean, and sell it to East Africa, and then small bits of those ending up in Europe, and again creating that desire for all of these products. So and interestingly, for most of human history, there was a major trade imbalance where the West had nothing of value for that Asia wanted. And you know, you may know something, if not you know, go down some YouTube rabbit holes, and you can read about the Opium War in China, especially between the British and the Chinese. This highlights the fact that the West had very little that Asia needed or wanted in terms of exchange, and the British were forced to resort to making the Chinese buy opium in exchange for tea, and fought civil wars to do that. And so, again, to emphasize that Asia, Southeast Asia, Indonesia in particular, have always been at a source and an engine of change and exchange in the world. And what you're feeling now, kind of a coming out party for Indonesia as on the world stage. What a momentous event, the G20 that's happening in Indonesia this fall. It is not a new phenomenon for a historian. It is a return to greatness, and perhaps the rightful place that Indonesia has occupied on the world stage. And so it's wonderful to see it happening again. And indigenous products that come from Indonesia, and with the Europe, Chinese were heavily engaging. There's our ports of major trade and port centers in Southeast Asia. But of course, that commerce, that wealth attracted interest also from bad actors. The Portuguese are the first to come in from Europe, and here we have a map of Portuguese conquests here in red. A major one is sort of Malacca that falls in 1511, and the Spanish coming in across the Pacific. They had, of course, the Spanish had conquered the New World, Mexico, especially, and South America, and then had moved across for the silver galleon trade into Manila. So European actors start moving heavily into Southeast Asia, and Indonesia will feel the pressure from this intervention. But it should be said, though, however, that most of the European actors in Southeast Asia didn't understand really how the trade worked, that it was largely the way trade works now, which is a free economy, a market of exchange, and European actors tried to conquer and monopolize certain ports and bases, and for much of the history, maybe most infamously, the Bugis merchants continued to run around European attempts to control that trade and subvert, which is interestingly, from your friends in Makassar, the Bugis, the English word boogeyman comes from Bugis, because the like a magical ghost, the Bugis prau were able to move and avoid the Dutch ships and sailor. So it's an interesting holdover from that period. I won't mention too much about the Portuguese, other to say that they tried, essentially, they moved the way a mafia would in terms of trying to threaten disruption if bribes weren't paid, and that didn't have a lasting effect, although it had a disruptive effect. And we can see, I'm going to jump forward to a chart here. If you look here, these are European imports of spices from Maluku. We see that they when the Portuguese hit in 1511, right, Balaka falls, we see a disruption. It goes down, but look what happens by 1600. Those imports. So these are imports on that Asians are exporting to Europe. They have recovered and are doing fine. And so while disruptive, it hardly was a lasting force. More impactful, however, was the Zaman Penjajahan Belanda in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia. An interesting role that in terms of administration, and if we think about how governance, how that works, everything I tell students sometimes, everything you love or hate about the way the world works today, much of it goes back to this moment when the Dutch East India Company is trying to control and manage and administer this wealth and trade in Indonesia. And why I say the way the world works today, if you think about international globalization, trade and commerce, the multinational corporation, the joint stock company, these are all invented by the Dutch East India Company to try to control and engage trade and commerce in Indonesia. And so Indonesia plays a unique role in shaping the way the modern marketplace works, because it's at the center of this dance that East and West are doing, and increasingly brutal methods by the Dutch to colonize and occupy and control the trade. I will say that the Dutch East India Company is we need my plea to young students. We need Indonesians who are studying this era of Indonesian history, because 90%, here's a fact for you, 90% of Indonesia's National Historical Archive is in Bahasa Belanda. 90% of Indonesia's National Historical Archive is in Dutch. And it shouldn't be just people who look like me who are reading those records and interpreting Indonesian history. We need Indonesians who are going to interpret their own history using these, and these records are not just important for Indonesian history. These records are the best source for global history, for understanding how sort of administering the world. There are kilometers of materials that exist in these archives, and I think if I could make a plea to the ministries to Brin and to other agencies, it would be to support students engaging in important historical research on this topic, and many others, public administration, of course, as well. But so the Dutch are, in terms of thinking how they are administering Indonesia, they are a multinational corporation. And what do I mean by multinational? Well, if we look at the map here, the Dutch put bases, we would call them a kantor, an office, in almost every port around the world. And why was this important? Well, this is important because unlike the Portuguese, who were sort of obsessed with well, not on wealth, but also maybe enforcing their, the Portuguese were obsessed with enforcing their religion and religious conversion on the places they conquered. The Dutch only really had financial interest in mind. And so instead of trying to conquer these places, they said, look, just set up an office there in these ports and pay attention to supply and demand, and take notes, set up an office, don't get involved in local politics as a Dutch agent in Pondichéry or Ahmedabad or Bandar Abbas or wherever, Sri Lanka, and take notes on the prices of goods that they're bought and sold for in these markets, and then send that information to us in Jakarta, Batavia, and we will manage all of this information. And then in the Dutch East India Company, they had sort of a big board, and they would put up these prices for different commodities, and they would say, where is say copper? Where is copper the most expensive? And they would look at their notes and say, we see it's most expensive in the Coromandel coast of India, on that the Sri Lankan side of India. That's where copper is the most expensive. And then they would look at their charts and say, where is copper the cheapest? And that's in Deshima, Japan. Actually, copper is the cheapest there. So what they would do is they would say, okay, well, only buy copper from Japan where it's cheapest. And then where are you going to sell it? Don't sell it at places along the route. Sell it where it's most expensive. Sell that copper in Coromandel coast of India. And so they do that with every commodity down the line that you can imagine. There are even notes where they're looking in Ambon and Maluku, where they're talking to local merchants, and they're seeing what textiles that local merchants love and are interested in, and they'll say like, okay, well, let's make this weave in India, and then we'll sell those because we can get more exchange. So they were very key and clever in looking at the market and manipulating supply and demand to do that. So that's the multinational part of it, is bringing all of those presence around the world, and exchanging that, monopolizing that information. I say in my notes, they're also a ruthless monopoly in some ways. So this is part of one way to do business. It's not a good way to administer long term, and that is monopolization. So this chart shows, especially the arrows here are places that were conquered and directly controlled. So in those other ports, the Dutch preferred to not conquer, so they didn't have to, pay the toll of trying to govern these places. But in ports around Indonesia, especially where key trade zones of the spice economy, they didn't want to let these places run freely and independently. And so they controlled and conquered these by monopolizing trade in buah-pala, bunga-pala, jengkelada. They really they let the other trade happen freely, but because they knew the price points in the global market, they manipulated it. And then in the fine spices, they exercised a harsh monopoly, which was very successful for them, but is not a good, sort of long-term sort of administrative strategy. Yeah, and then of course, Maluku is at the center of at the center of this as the place where especially nutmeg, clove, and mace grow originally and endemically as well. An interesting holdover that I think actually administratively becomes part of Indonesia's Indonesia going forward is that the Dutch were sort of strangely tolerant in some ways, unlike the Portuguese, and by that I mean they didn't care what people's religion, they didn't care what the customs they practiced. They cared about the financial return, and so it made them strangely tolerant in some ways compared to the Spanish or the Portuguese. Also, the Dutch had really no choice but to intermarry. That's the source of some of my research, is looking at the women that the Dutch intermarried with, simply because they almost 1,980,000, I think it is 980,000 Europeans are hired by the Dutch East India Company. Almost 1 million people the Dutch bring over to Indonesia before 1800, almost 1 million, and almost all of those are men. And so they're engaging with local merchants, but also importantly, women who are at the forefront of commercial activities in Indonesia, which is look at the dais that introduced me. We have strong female leaders who are front and center. Indonesia does not have a problem with that, and that's part of its history as well. It has always had women have been at the forefront of these public, administrative, commercial activities, and that's really been source of its strength. Frankly, we have records from merchants who come from China, who come from India, who come from the Middle East, who come from Europe, and they are shocked to see, in Sumatra, like a sultana, a female sultan, or as a shabandar, as a harbor master, meeting with them, to see women in the marketplace. It was very foreign to them, coming from cultures that wanted to keep women concealed, under wraps, hidden away in the houses. That's never been part of Indonesia's success historically, and I think it's part of its recipe for success going forward. Is Indonesia recognizes aptitude, recognizes ability, regardless of whether it's in a man or a woman, etc. And I think that's and the Dutch used this to their advantage by sort of letting Indonesians do what they do, and that has been a continuity. So let me I could drone on. I could drone on forever, but because I want to make sure that I bring up some of the points about the 20th century and especially the present, and then we can perhaps in the Q&A go into much more depth. I think that if you look at Indonesia's struggle for independence, and we're going back to like Syarikat Islam and this sort of age of motion in the early 20th century, one interesting thing that happens is that Indonesia is I don't take offense. I say Indonesia makes very little sense as a country. yet it's one of the most successful. What do I mean that it makes little sense as a country, right? It is all of these different cultures, all of these different languages thrown together. If you were to ask someone, say like, and I remember talking to people at the fall of Suharto, they were saying like, oh, I don't know if Indonesia is going to survive as a country. And I was thinking, I definitely think it will, because Indonesia is one of the sort of important administrative places where it shares this with America. Indonesia is not an ethnicity. Indonesia is an idea. America is not an ethnicity. America is an idea. And this idea of Indonesia that is being worked out and has been over the really last 120 years, as Indonesia has worked out. In the end of the 19th century, we saw resistance and like Diponegoro and other sort of famous Indonesian actors who fought. Most of the Indonesian identity was about pushing back against the colonial colonial administration. But by 1900, Kartini and others start thinking about Indonesia not defined negatively by the outside, but about what it is as an idea. And now when I think of what Indonesia stands for, I'd love to think about this maybe in the Q&A, is I think if you look at its democracy, I think Indonesia is quickly becoming the most important beacon for democracy in the world. And I don't say that lightly. In Asia, everywhere, democracy is backsliding. And Indonesia continues to be a pillar of success. In the United States, democracy is in real danger. And yet in this very complicated country of 30,000 islands, Indonesia manages to successfully pull off this incredible feat of democracy administratively every election. And Indonesia, unlike Americans, Indonesians recognize the results of those elections, concede those elections, and it's an amazing thing to behold. And this has its roots in thinking of continuity and change. This has its roots in the early days of Indonesian nationalism, where Indonesia's best and brightest from around the archipelago are brought together by the Dutch in these schools to train and study together, and they start identifying with each other at common cause. So people who may have come from Irian and Sumatra and Makassar, they realize they have in terms of ideology, they have some real connecting tissue, and they decide to throw that lot in together and to see those cultural differences as useful, as an advantage, to not try to homogenize and say there's one way to be Indonesian, there's only one language, there's only one culture, but to say like, no, let's actually embrace that difference, that diversity, and use it as an advantage. And let's work out Indonesia as instead of an ethnicity, Indonesia is an idea. And I think democracy is a pillar of what it means to be Indonesian. We are very honored in again coming this October. We're going to host the Indonesian Election Commission, the KPU. The commissioners are all coming to NIU to do some training. They'll study with some of our colleagues. We'll learn from them as well. excitedly, Indonesian Election Commission is going to come monitor our elections in the United States in 2024, our presidential elections, and we're going to come to Indonesia in 2024 to be there for your presidential election. Should be very exciting to behold. So I think administratively democracy is one thing that Indonesia has chose to let define itself, and it's when Indonesia goes out into the world to in emerging democracies, it doesn't have the stain on it that American and Western powers do, because I don't think the State Department doesn't always like it when I say this in our grants, but we have a problem. The United States says we say we believe in democracy, yet we have a history of subverting democracy, and even overthrowing countries that we disagree with very undemocratically, is where Indonesia doesn't have that stain on it. Indonesia has not engaged in that behavior, stands as a sort of a shibboleth, a model for democracy that is not without hypocrisy. And that sort of democracy without hypocrisy is a key to, I think, its sort of administrative success going forward. I think multiculturalism, as I've mentioned, mixed together is a key part of that, of the soup, of the soto that makes Indonesia so rich and delicious. It's learned to appreciate. As I look around the room there, I see all of these wonderful batik, right? They're from all across the archipelago. Every region has its own style. It really embraces multiculturalism as part of that success, and I think will again be a model for other countries as they again, thinking United States, our own challenges with our multicultural population present problems, is where I think Indonesia see it as opportunities. Of course, there are challenges in Indonesia, especially in Papua, but I think Indonesia, more than most countries, is going to be able to successfully navigate those. It'll be interesting. Maybe in Q&A we can talk about decentralization. Is I think another important part of the story of administratively the continuity. There were unfortunate administrative continuities from colonialism. One of the unfortunate one was exploitation of resources, especially natural resources, forests, mining, etc. The deforestation looked very similar to when the Dutch and Japanese were here, as it did after in under Sukarno and under Suharto as well. But I think decentralization has given autonomy and control over local regions to make local decisions about their resources, about their environment. That, coupled with the fact that Indonesia's this Nusantara, this water world that is Indonesia, makes it impossible to pretend that global climate change is not a major issue on the world's for Indonesia. I think Americans can pretend it's not. People who live in the middle of the country, like I do, can put their head in the sand and pretend that these things are not affecting them. But Indonesians can, everyone can walk to the beach and see it happening, and start asking questions about how their resources should be used, how sustainability will work going forward. And so I think that coupled with sort of a sense of local governance, that their voice matters, have made Indonesia have put in motion the pieces for it to have success going forward. Now, what are the challenges? I don't want to pretend that this will all be easy. There will be challenges. One of the most interesting is, as Indonesia emerges as really a leading country in the world, and it will become even more important as it goes on, navigating the tension between China and the West. I think Indonesia has a particular superhero role to play administratively here. Can it broker? It is the key linchpin, I think, to perhaps de-escalating. It has its sort of constitutional belief in non-alignment means that it is able to, and you saw this as your president was maybe the only president who is visiting Russia and visiting Ukraine sort of the next day, right? And able to really legitimately negotiate with both sides to come to because it is non-aligned. So that I guess non-alignment would be, I guess, the final piece of the administrative puzzle. And your great sort of one of your great founders, Sukarno, firmly believed in that policy, and it, I think, is an important part of Indonesia's success going forward. I want to leave time for. I'm really interested to hear what the people online and in person have to say. So maybe I'll leave it to our moderator to ask questions, and then we can discuss. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Eric, for the wonderful presentation and insight. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard insightful lesson from Dr. Eric Jones, regarding our historical times, gitu ya, when we are colonialized. And now we've come to the Q&A discussions. Again, you are welcome to ask the questions using Bahasa Indonesia or English. And we will have these question sessions until 2025, okay? Okay, for the first batch of this question, for those of you who are gathering live in this room, any one of you want to ask, please raise your hand. Okay, we have, okay, 2 person, okay, we have 4, yeah. For the first batch, we will, okay, just all 4. Please, Mbak yang baju abu-abu ya, ke mic untuk menanyakan pertanyaannya langsung. Thank you.
Hello, Pak Eric. Thank you for your explanations. That's very enlightened. So my question is...
permisi, Mbak, maybe your name and your program. Thank you.
My name is Desi Ernawati. I'm study at Jalan. My major is development policy.
Lahir di mana?
Sorry?
Lahir di mana?
Lahir di Malang. Saya lahir di Malang. Okay. I would like ask in English, is okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would like ask your opinion about does the experience of being colonized nation, I mean, we are as the 350 years under Dutch colonized, and then becoming independent and building a country, have an effect on the administrative system that the Indonesia currently apply. Thank you. So,
yeah, thank you. I think it definitely does, for good and for bad. I think for good, it builds like I said, a sense of appreciation of that independence and autonomy has to be fought for, can't be taken for granted. A vigilance for looking out for Indonesia's safety and security are important and paramount. It can also breed some challenges, so maybe some unnecessary fears or paranoia. And I'll say, for example, there was this is still being talked about in Indonesia, but for example, foreign researchers, right, who come to Indonesia, there's still a debate about, well, should they be allowed to, it's not easy to get access to do research in Indonesia. You need lots of permissions. You need lots of, and I think this comes from a colonial sense of, if we just open up the place, who knows what will happen. The experience with colonies is, I could see why people would have questions and concerns. But I would counter and say, you may have had to worry about that in, say, the Cold War, for good reason. But Indonesia now is really on the, the G20, it's on the big stage. And if you look at, say, Germany or France or the United States, they aren't worried about foreign researchers coming in and doing their research and trying to very closely control and manage. And I think that, so the confidence is something that is slowly, like the sense that, like, I don't have to police as carefully administratively what's going on, because there's really nothing that can topple this country. This is the kind of certainty that a France or a Germany or United States walks around or China in the world. Now, I guess China is a bad example in the case that it is very paranoid about how it's managed in the world. But so I would guess, what I hope is that as Indonesia continues to take its rightful place at the center of the world stage, it is less worried about its policing its boundaries, because I think it can relax knowing that that there's more advantage to be had by having a more open border policy than there is to be worried from aggressively policing those boundaries, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Eric.
Good question.
Yeah, thank you, Mbak. Okay, next question, please come to the mic. Please come to the microphone, the lady in front ya tadi ya. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Eric. Assalamualaikum, or good evening, everyone. My name is Nurliah. I'm from MSDA, or maybe Apparatus Resource Management concentration. I'm come from Witness and Victim Protection Agency in Indonesia, or LPSK. Maybe you hear. I want to ask about, maybe as explained in your presentation, that VOC is listed as a multinational holding company for the first time in history. In fact, how much or what kind of influence did the VOC have as a multinational holding company affecting the administrating affairs and public policy activities in Indonesia or its colonies in that time, and what influence lasts to this day? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. I mean, I think the centralization that it was necessary in Indonesia's infancy and after World War II, where it so successfully fought and struggled for its independence from the Japanese and the Dutch. Centralization was important to survive. I think so, and it really got that from that strong sense of territorial integrity, as political science talk about, of firm borders, fixed boundaries from the Dutch. If you think about the era before the multinational corporation, the VOC, Indonesians didn't they didn't conceive of themselves as the country of Indonesia, right? They conceive of themselves as, oh, I'm Madaris, or I'm Orang Jawa, or I'm Batak, or they didn't, their identity was not as the whole archipelago. Their identity was more local and regional. And so I think the administrative centralization. So the Dutch took people from all around the archipelago, brought them together to help administer, to train, and that helped create a sense of identity as an Indonesia, as opposed to just a local, regional suku bangsa. But I think that centralization was really important for what's interesting is the Dutch East India, or the Nederlandse Indische Compagnie. They wanted an idea of an Indonesia because it helped them govern. But in creating that Indonesia, it created the weapon that would overthrow the Dutch. So just like when the French create a Vietnam out of different areas that had nothing to do with each other, suddenly they create the very weapon that will kick them out of the country. And so it was but if you think about these Indonesian your ancestors in a school in 1920 or 1930 in a Dutch school, where they're taught about democracy and independence and equality, but none of that is being given to them. So they're saying these are Western values that are important, while the Dutch are not allowing Indonesians to have democracy, independence, autonomy, right? And so but Indonesians are saying those ideas are actually very good, but we should now get to exercise those, and they do, and they're in their independence. So I guess that strong sense of national togetherness was important, but as I mentioned earlier, it can also be I think it can create nationalism that is dangerous. We see this in the United States a lot, where kind of American pride can also mean American dislike for other countries. And so that is the challenge for Indonesia, is to maintain a sense of pride as Indonesians, a pride of identity itself, without without discriminating against others, without seeing others as less than. And that will come, I hope, as Indonesia, goes from success to success, a sense of confidence where it's okay if that other country is successful. We can both be successful, and we can both share in that. So I think that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's an interesting continuity that administratively that will be the key to success and also a challenge for Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eric. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Okay, thank you. Now to have some colors, I will mix with questions from Zoom. To committee, please show the selected questions.
Yeah, I'll let you choose. You can.
Yeah. Okay, this one is questions from Ilham Maulana Yusuf. Let me read it for you. One of the cultural heritage of the Dutch in Indonesia is corruption, which is still an administrative disease. And now it is still difficult to fight against corrupt practices in its administrations because it has become a negative culture. What do you think is the solutions for Indonesia in eliminating the negative culture of corruption from the Dutch culture so that the administration in Indonesia can be completely independent from the legacy of colonialism? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Please answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, right. This is one of the things that also, right, could drag Indonesia under is KKN. The corruption is, it's definitely, my sense is though, it's definitely getting better. And, you know, talk to your parents and grandparents about the Suharto era. It is much better, as challenging as it seems now. It was much worse before. It doesn't mean that, and it's good to have this up in front in the radar, because corruption and can undermine democracy. It can undermine nation building. It can create cynicism in administrative processes. I think Singapore is an interesting model to look at for Indonesia in terms of fighting corruption. And Singapore is one of the, you know, on the index, the corruption index, Singapore is one of the best. Now, people will say, well, it's done that by sort of strong arm, undemocratic tactics to alleviate corruption. And I guess that is a one critique. However, do the ends justify the means? I think continuing, you know, we see you know, public opinion go back and forth in terms of the corruption and corruption watch, and you know, who's watching the watchers. The fact though that I hear so many youth, and it still remains to be, that the corruption is something that Indonesians know inherently exists and has to be combated. I think a rising middle class in Indonesia will be a key to breaking down corruption, because a middle class won't have the deep pockets that the super rich have to run the show, and they're not going to be willing to pay the bribes that are asked of them, but they're developing and emerging and are going to have. So I think locking arms as a you know, the people in your room, for example, and exposing corruption, turning an eye against it, will be, but this is I mean, Ilham Maulana Yusuf, this is maybe the one most important, you know, as we look back, and how does Indonesia succeed or fail? I don't think Indonesia will fail, but if you look at, say, Brazil or the Philippines, you know, that there's all this potential, but then you know, there's a plateau or even a drop off. We want to prevent that in Indonesia, and I think rooting out corruption is now the Dutch were ruthless when it came to rooting out corruption, and they when they found out that people in Banda were selling outside of the Dutch East India Company, they just killed all of them. They murdered every person in Banda and repopulated it. Now, I don't think that is a way to handle corruption. That's worse than corruption. But I think everyday Indonesians standing up and saying, like, to a government worker saying, I shouldn't have to pay a bribe for you to do your job, right? I shouldn't have to pay this fine for everyday people to do what they are paid to do in their role. And so I think the more that it is rooted out of kind of smaller ways that things operate, but my sense is it's getting better. But I think you living in Indonesia full time, you have a better sense of that than I do. Thank you. Good question.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Eric. Okay, now another questions from Zoom, yeah. Please show committee. Okay, from Darmawansyah. Long ago, before the formation of the state of Indonesia, the kingdom is in the archipelago have established international relations, both through trade and diplomatic relations, meaning that the young and intellectual modalities to become a developed and large country have existed since before. My question is why Indonesia has not been able to rise to become a developed country. Is there something wrong with the state management system since Indonesia is a state? Okay, your insight, please, Dr. John.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think my lecture I hope addressed this, but Indonesia was had to deal with penjajahan, had to deal with colonial. Do you realize that you think of a first world country like the Netherlands, 40% of Dutch gross national product was siphoned off of Indonesia. Think about that. 40% of the riches of the Netherlands were stolen from Indonesia in the colonial period. Think about the Japanese. I mean, they tried to run Indonesia into the ground. Ramusha, forced labor, brutal. I mean, maybe a way to flip this question is to say, it's sort of amazing that Indonesia is as well off as it is now, right now, given what it had to endure in the colonial era. I mean, it had everything going against it. So I think it might be frustrating to see, like, why is Indonesia not? It's when we talk a few years from now, I don't think this will be a question of being, fully developed. If one interesting index historians look at, ask people, are they better or worse off than their parents? Are they better or worse off than their grandparents? How do they have optimism? Like, if you look at the United States, interestingly, youth today are more pessimistic, feel like they can't afford school, they can't afford a home, they can't afford cost of living. They feel worse off than their parents. Indonesians, they feel 10 times better than their grandparents in terms of success, options, opportunity. So while it may be frustrating, it may be frustrating that it has to manage this right now, and is not. You're in the G20, you're going to be in the G7 soon, and there's no, given Indonesia's centrality geographically, demographically, and natural resource wise, there's no reason to, it can't be, and the top of the food chain. So I think patience, and there's something to be said for its place as a broker in this among major world countries. So I guess that would be my rephrasing of that question. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, very interesting discussions. We also have one special questions from our directors, Professor Nurliah. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Eric.
Yes.
It's really great to hear your statement that 90% of our historical document was written by the Dutch. by the colonialisms. I think that is the challenge. It's really a great challenge for us as a youngest, as a Indonesian youngest, to start writing about our own history. Because when we let others writing our history, it will be in their perspective.
Correct.
The challenge. So the question is, how would you suggest us, we study public administration in Politeknik Jakarta, for the current research or the future research to embrace what should we learn from the past? That is a serious question. And the not serious question, I think so many people around here asking, there's a hidden question. In your necklace, is that batu akik?
Yeah. This is the...
Yeah, there's so many people asking, hidden question. Please ask, is that batu akik?
This is, turquoise. We have from, this is from sort of Native American Indian in New Mexico. So yeah, there we go. Yeah. It's called I grew up a cowboy on a ranch in Wyoming, so that will explain some of the clothing choices. Actually, when I first went to Indonesia, I stayed with a farmer outside of Yogyakarta, and I felt very connected because we were both worked with animals, worked with anyway. So, but I think what can we learn from? I think, it's hard to convince a young person in Indonesia, like, oh, learn Dutch. Like, what? I understand that it's not, but Indonesia is a huge country. There should be people who are translating those archives, who can do that history. And there's a ton to do in records that are in Bahasa as well, right? And so I think thinking about the Sukarno era guided democracy, Orde Baru, administratively trying to understand, especially the transitions, which as Dr. Nurliah knows, our own NIU and other Indonesians played such an important role in writing the Constitution and shaping the. So I think these transition points in where Indonesia could have gone one direction or another direction. It's really interesting to look at the decisions that were made and why they were made and what resulted from those. And so I think understanding, one research project that your students might want to get involved with is I'm going to be doing an oral history of NIU alumni in Indonesia about this very question, about the transition to democracy and how that evolved, how that took place, sort of inspirations for, and so I think, as Dr. Nurliah, if you think about the group that you came up with, or the group that preceded you as a generation, like motivations for understanding, studying topics that you did, believing in these sort of democratic and transparent principles, and like, where did that come from? I think the more that Indonesians can understand their own sort of decision tree and how one thing led to the next, it can help inform good decisions down the road, where, hey, we can look back at our own history and say, I talk about this all the time in US foreign policy. Look at how many times do we have to intervene and invade a country for it to, and even if you take morality out of the question and say, did it have was it good economically? Like it's the answer is always no, almost. always. And so how many times do you have to make the wrong decision before you learn? And so I think Indonesia, as it starts to make as it goes forward, it's at this really important point where the decisions really matter right now as you're taking your place on the world stage. And so understanding lessons from the even the recent past, even sort of 98 and beyond, about whether it's if you look at governance locally, federally, how what worked, what didn't work, and kind of mirroring best practices. And and as your students go out and really start teaching and practicing public administration, for example, to think about those best practices and reach back into its recent or even older history as a for different models, like this worked here, try this didn't work here, avoid that. The more that those are taught and understood as a kind of a tool belt of options that are can help in different scenarios, I think it's going to be better for Indonesia. I just got a text that I've got 10 more minutes I can stay on. So my meeting was delayed, so I can sit around for longer.
Okay, good news, yeah. So we have another 10 minutes of Dr. Eric times, but I think we can only answer one more questions. So okay. Please, another questions from in this room, live in this room. Another one who wants to ask question directly. I think there are a man over here. Anyone wants to ask? No? Okay. Please go on. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Eric. I think I know your necklace. It's called, that's called Turkish in Indonesia, and Batu Akik is pink.
And please name and your program.
My name is Ferda Firmansyah, program di MSDMA, Sumber Daya Manusia, Aparatur. I want to ask a question. In your opinions, what are the factors that made colonialism in Indonesia take so long?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the answer is the world had, if you think of something like slavery as a good example, like how did we allow for so long the idea that people could own other people, right? How did the part of there was a global it wasn't until 1900 that the idea emerges that maybe each group of people should decide their own future, right? That if you think about the United States, it fights a war for independence from Britain because it is, it's saying we're taxation without representation. We are being controlled, but we don't have a voice. We don't have a vote, and that is wrong. Now it would take another 150 years for the United States to say, oh, we feel that's wrong for us. It's also wrong for us to enforce that on other people as well. But part of it is an emerging that it took so long for the world to decide that is a wrong idea, but even like World War II, when what's interesting is that as bad as the Japanese were and brutal as they were in Indonesia, one advantage of the Japanese in World War II is that the Dutch, the British, the French had built a myth in the minds of the places they controlled in Asia. That is like, we are better than you, we are superior, treating their colonies as children, right? And that mentality, and people believe on both sides start to really believe that. And, that's a dangerous idea. One thing happens when the Japanese come and they just, in a month, they destroy the Dutch, the French, the British, and it's interesting to read journals. Like if you have journals you're from your grandparents about what they felt when the Japanese came in, like it's like a Hollywood movie when the alien spaceship comes down and changes everything. That is how Indonesians felt seeing, Dutch white people rounded up and put in jails and abused by fellow Asians, by the Japanese officers. It was their minds sort of broke in good ways. Like they had lived, like the parable of the sort of the ants and the grasshoppers, right? The grasshoppers control the ants, but the ants don't realize there are many more of us. If we just team up against the grasshoppers, we can take them. And so I think part of it is a global consensus that it is wrong and immoral to do that, and also an internal sense of hey, we don't have to take this. We are not inferior. That is a lie that the colonizing told us, to allow them to treat us like draft animals or enslave us or to control us. And so part of it is recalibrating their own expectations about who they are. And so I guess I would say part of why it took Indonesia so long is because it took the world so long to come to that idea. And then I would say also, but it didn't end there, because if you look, unfortunately, the U.S. In 1957-58, tried to overthrow Indonesia. So even though it had, it was worried about Sukarno's non-aligned policy, he wouldn't take sides against the Soviets, and it frustrated American policymakers. So even after publicly stating that, the colonialism was wrong and that every country should have its own independence, that wasn't really what was practiced. And so that's where I also teach about the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, of subversion as foreign policies, so you couldn't publicly colonize people anymore. It wasn't allowed on the world stage. So you did it secretly. You undermined, you thwart, you try to subtly control, pay right-wing dictators to support you in those countries. And so it took, and we're still not there completely, but these are ideas. Power does not like to give itself up easily. And so like the Dutch, they fought after brutal World War II in the Netherlands. They came back and 4 years fought, using every dime of aid and assistance in World War II reconstruction. They fought Indonesians. Thankfully, the Indonesians defeated them soundly. But these ideas die hard. So I mean, it's nothing against Indonesians for allowing that to happen, because the world had to come to that mature idea. So that's a good question. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I get it.
Okay. Thank you. So actually the discussions is getting more and more interesting, yeah. But because due to time constraints, Mr. Eric can only be with us until 2040, and now it's already 2040. So I have to close these discussion sessions and these lecture sessions, yeah. Well, but actually there are more than 20 questions that comes to the committee. Thank you for your enthusiasm though. And but sorry, we cannot read it all. Apology for any questions that didn't get to be asked, but the committee has selected 15 best questions to get special prizes later, yeah, it will be announced. So let me wrap up for this session. Dr. Eric, thank you very much for your knowledge and insight. That was very rich and soundful. Let me capture a strong takeaways from these sessions. For me, what I learned is Indonesia is actually very rich, very strategic locations. That's why we are being colonized. And we are fought for our independence with high price. But in this time of struggling, we also learn many things, such as centralization, languages, and cultures. Again, Indonesia is not an ethnicity, it is an idea. And this Indonesia has been worked out for hundreds of years. Indonesia becoming, hopefully Indonesia will become the most important democracy in the world, as you say. And so we need to think big. We have to remove that small mentality that resulted from 100 years of colonizations. So learning for post-colonialism, what we struggle right now is to different aspect of humanity. We have to maintain Indonesian pride without discriminating others, and we can always learn from success of other countries. I guess that's my takeaways. So let's work out this Indonesia as Indonesia's idea. Okay, that's wrap for these sessions. We hope you found this informative and useful. My apologies for any shortcomings in these sessions. I return. See. Thank you.
Thank you. See you again.
Thank you, moderator. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the conclusion event. Before we end this session, we would like to present the certificate. This certificate is for Mr. Eric Allen Jones, Ph.D., for being our keynote speaker on this event.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice.
And we would also like to inform you of some points. First, we have chosen the names for the best questions. To all the best questions, congratulations. And to claim your prize, please contact the number as follow or the committee.
Nice.
Second, for the participation certificate, please fill the attendance form shared by the committee in the chat. Third, all students must create and submit a resume on today's event and to be submitted in the attendance list. The attendance list is open until tomorrow at 1 p.m. Indonesian time. Fourth, all certificate and materials will be sent through email at the latest 2 days after submitting the attendance list. And finally, this is the end of our session. I would like to extend our gratitude to the speaker and participants. May this event can bring us so much something to learn. Apology for any shortcomings and see you at the next events. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you.
Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, bagi tadi Bapak Ibu yang bertanya dan berada di ruangan ini, silahkan hadir ke meja MC di depan untuk mengambil souvenir. Bagi yang bertanya via online, nanti silahkan menghubungi nomor yang tadi tercantum di depan. Terima kasih atas perhatiannya. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.